Look at this new study that just came out. If you're wondering why there's these tip screens on every table in America, well, it's because people tip 11% more digitally than they do with cash.
To tip or not to tip? That appears to be the question yet again as tipping options pop up in new places.
Welcome to the tipping point. Not the psychological kind, but the kind that hits your wallet.
I'm purchasing an office chair online, and they're asking me if I want to leave a tip.
Today, we're diving into the curious world of tipping, where it feels like every checkout screen in America has suddenly sprouted a big blinking tip me button. Gone are the days when tipping was confined to restaurants and taxis. Now, thanks to omnipresent glowing screens, everything from your barista to your self-checkout is looking for a little extra. Doesn't it seem like one day you were just buying a coffee and the next you're doing the tipping tango with a digital screen that won't let you proceed until you've awkwardly decided how generous you're feeling? You're in uncaffeinated purgatory until you tap your way out. Or maybe the ride-sharing scenario. No sooner has the vehicle stopped than your phone dings with a prompt for a tip.
Uber now displays tipping options more prominently in the app, and Dan says he's noticed the difference.
The real chunk of where you made your money is tipping.
Now sure, the driver might rely on these tips, but the prompt itself adds an instant layer of obligation, making what could be a simple transaction feel like a moral judgment.
Restaurant servers make as little as $4 an hour, and they're expected to make up the rest in tip. Should employers pay more so that people aren't so dependent on their tips?
You see, in the U.S., the federal minimum wage for tipped employees is $2.13 per hour, provided that this amount plus the tips received equals at least the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. Otherwise, your company, the employer, must make up the difference. This system allows businesses, particularly in the hospitality and service industries, to legally pay significantly lower wages on the assumption that tips will cover that shortfall.
Larry Kramer says based on his years of restaurant experience, he believes the current system of tipping works best for everyone.
Some person might tip 30%. Some person might tip 18%. So the server makes a lot more by getting tips. It also motivates the server to do well.
Federal law says businesses can pay tipped employees as little as $2.13 an hour.
And the reason for that is because they expect you to make around $5.12 an hour in tips. That's $5.12 an hour the company doesn't have to pay. If you aren't making $5.12 an hour in tips, then the company has to pay out of pocket to match $7.25 an hour. I want to give you a really clear example of how this works. Here's a chart that shows you make about $6 an hour in tips. After working 8 hours, you make $65.04 as the employee, but the employer only has to pay you $17.04. Okay, now let me show you this chart with $0 an hour in tips. Your company has to pay out of pocket $40.96 to get you to the minimum wage for that day, which is $58. Now does it make sense why companies love employing tipped workers?
Because it helps pay for the employees.
But let's imagine a world where your coffee doesn't come with a side of guilt. That's the world CookUnity lives in, which is today's sponsor. If deciding whether to tip or not has you feeling like you're on a game show where every answer feels wrong, then with CookUnity, the only pressure you'll feel is deciding which meal to heat up next. If you've never heard of CookUnity before, they're chef-crafted meals delivered to you weekly. And they have choices. Boy, do they have choices. East Coast, West Coast. You want Texas food? They got Texas food. Now, let's say you're a bit pickier than that, or your dietary needs are different. They actually have filters on your filters for your filters. I mean, come on, they have a pizza filter. You want protein only? They got it. Not that kind of protein? Hey, that's cool too. They got veggie meal. As you can see, the chefs over at CookUnity offer a wide range of meals, over 7 different dietary preference filters, including vegan, paleo, and gluten-free options. Let me show you a few meals I ordered. First up, we've got herb roasted chicken breast from Chef Kevin Meehan. This chicken's got more herbs than a farmer's market on a Sunday morning. That's the one I'm actually eating while I'm editing this video. Every time I cook chicken and heat it up, it tastes like rubber. But this tastes like it's from the restaurant. There's the barbecue chicken burrito by Chef Ruben Garcia. And lastly, rainbow chicken and pasta salad by Chef Nelson Brazella. The salad's got more layers than your favorite winter outfit, and it's dressed better too. That's because the chefs at CookUnity use real ingredients, nothing artificial. You can pause, skip, or cancel faster than you can, not tip on the digital screen at least. If you didn't get it, there's no tipping required. It's quite the opposite. If you go to cookunity.com/fluke50, you'll actually get 50% off your first order. Not a tip jar in sight. So go support the people who support this channel and get yourself one of these delicious CookUnity meals. So why the sudden spread of tipping everywhere? Post-COVID, a lot of consumers, not everyone, started to appreciate service workers more.
Square is a leader in these point-of-sales devices. They tell us when the pandemic started, tipping became more commonplace to support workers during those takeout orders. And that mentality appears to have stuck.
Do you know a lot of other restaurateurs?
Yes, I do.
Do they generally feel the same way that you do about the tipping structure?
I think it's pretty much a consensus now in the industry, and that's why these QSRs are adding tips to their business. Before, you wouldn't have it at a Sweet Green or a Dig or a coffee shop, but they're adding a tipping mechanism as well because it helps pay for the employees.
See, there you go, from a business owner himself.
Because it helps pay for the employees.
That way, I don't have to. Thank you for making it exceptionally easy for everyone to know where to not work. I wonder how many people apply there after this.
As prices go up and more services outside of traditional restaurants are asking their customers if they'd like to toss in a few bucks extra. Some people are starting to feel what's been labeled as tipping fatigue.
Now, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you're wondering, does being put on the spot while someone watches you affect how much you're tipping? Turns out, absolutely.
I always tip because I feel like I should, but I don't always feel like I should.
Studies show that when other people are watching, people tip more. It's actually intricately tied to social pressures and the desire to avoid appearing stingy or unappreciative in public. Payments.com highlights research indicating that digital screens at checkout amplify this pressure significantly. Right here it says social pressure drives up tips by 50%. So here's the chart, and down here you can see when no one's watching, people tip an average of 10%. When a stranger's watching, you get 12%. A family friend or the worker receiving the tip, you're probably going to tip 15%. Another chart right here shows that if you have a tip jar, people tip around 10%, but if you have a digital screen asking for that money, they tip around 15%. This part of the study is nuts. Despite most consumers, 75% of them believing that it is inappropriate for self-checkout kiosks to have the tip option, a significant portion still comply with these requests. 59% of consumers tipped when asked to do so at a fast food establishment, and 62% of people tip at retail or grocery stores. Wait a minute, you're telling me that 25% of people think it is okay for self-checkout kiosks to have a tipping option? Who's this other 25%? And now that you know how tipping works, you gotta love the CEO's take. Your ability to tip with a smartphone is important for two reasons. The first one is through retention of keeping staff who normally don't get tips, and second, it provides a simple option for guests to show their appreciation at any time without fumbling for cash. Or is that because it's money you don't have to pay them? Or how about this guy, Brian? He says that your ability to get tips could be as transformative as early wage access. Or how about this CEO David here, who runs a bunch of hotels and partnered with this company called Shiny. So I guess Shiny allows you to tip housekeeping. We could pay people more, or we could pay for this service that allows people to tip them instead of just paying that to our people. Because I imagine you paid for this service you partnered with to allow people to tip them. Anyways, tipping is out of control. What do you think? If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. Feel free to share the video with someone else if you think it would help them out. And I hope you keep tipping people generously, but just remember where this whole thing comes from. If you have anything else you'd like me to show on the channel, feel free to reach out. Discord, Instagram, email, however you want to do it. The links for that are all down in the description. Oh, and thanks again to Cook Unity for sponsoring today's video. And don't forget, they're actually tipping you 50% off if you use my code down in the description, or you go to cookunity.com/fluke50. Having said all that, I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll see you in the next one.